Welcome back, y'all. Today we are going to talk about Pam Bondi and the few things that she did actually have to say on the stand, and a little bit about the Epstein files and how that all relates to real estate. So let's dive in. If you put $100,000 into the stock market 25 years ago, you definitely have a nice portfolio right now. If you put that same $100,000 into a house, you'd have a small empire. The difference isn't just the percentage, it's the power of the bank's money. So let's talk about that. Pam was talking over and over.
The Dow is over 50,000 right now. The S&P at almost 7,000. And the NASDAQ smashing records. Americans' 401ks and retirement savings are booming. That's what we should be talking about. We should be talking about making Americans safe. We should be talking about, what does a Dow have to do with anything? That's what they just asked. Are you kidding?
Mr. Jordan, Mr. Jordan.
Oh, well, we're doing so great with 401ks and all this kind of stuff. But what a lot of people don't remember is that a lot of people lost a lot of money in their 401ks back in January and December after the election cycle kind of started coming around. So we're talking about over time, how these things add up. So historically, the averages have been about roughly 7 to 10% on total return, including dividends. That is for about 30 years. It's outpaced real estate in pure price appreciation. So 1,000 times versus 300 times. But here's how it kind of works out. In real estate, the average is 4 to 5% in annual price appreciation. While it's lower on paper, that doesn't actually account for real estate rental income or tax write-offs like depreciation. So they're comparing the S&P 500 to very quick money, very active position that you would need to take as an investor, reading a lot of the Wall Street Journal, seeing what corporations are buying each other and being able to predict in advance. Those types of people do extremely well in the S&P 500 because they are constantly looking at that information and that data on a daily basis. They're trading more regularly than like somebody like you and I would. Also, there's a lot of a larger, I would say, like educational gap between what you can do in real estate and what you can do in the S&P 500 because of the way the tax structures and the tax incentives lean towards real estate, and depreciation and these type of things lead towards real estate. They're a lot easier to understand. There's not as much guesswork for a client or for an investor to think about, especially if you're just kind of trying to get into the market somewhere and you're like, oh, well, it's going to be cheaper for me to throw $3,000 at Bitcoin. Well, you might not really know what Bitcoin is going to do. You don't know how to really use Bitcoin. Why would you waste that $3,000 on Bitcoin? Why would you put that $3,000 in the S&P market unless you weren't really sure which direction you were going with it and just to hold it? So the leverage secret that we want to talk about is pretty much the most important point of this whole conversation. If you bought that $100,000 stock purchase, right? You split it up and you moved it in between a bunch of industries and all that kind of stuff, you could expect a 10% gain on that. So now you got $110,000, okay? In real estate, if you use that $100,000 as a down payment to buy a $500,000 property, a 5% gain on the house would be about $25,000, meaning that your actual return on your invested cash is 25%, not 5%. So there's a lot that changes around when you're looking at real estate and leverage versus the S&P and leverage. Volatility versus peace of mind. One thing I say to everybody when I'm talking about the S&P 500 is I believe there are too many people's hands in it. And now, as you've seen in the Epstein files and you've heard Pam Bondi disseminate in different ways, you don't know whose hands are in what. You don't know what these bankers are doing. You don't know what some of these government officials are doing. It causes a lot of distrust in the system. But when you see $25,000 loss in your 401k overnight because of the way the economy shifted or because of something that the president or somebody has said, the attorney general has said, you can see people, the fear rising. You don't have to worry about that when you have an investment that you can touch, you can see, you can feel, you could just take that investment back over, and that's housing. So housing is going to be much more important over the next 5 to 10 years for you to be looking at as we're shifting into a different political climate here. So read between the lines. If you hear these politicians on TV talking about how wonderful something is, maybe you should look into ways where it might not be so wonderful, because a lot of times there's smoke and mirrors out there. You're not really getting the truth. People just want to talk about and accelerate their own agendas. And it's not just politicians either. It could be salespeople as well. So make sure you're educated when you go into that realm. And then the other thing we've been talking about, while we talk about this, while the S&P might appear to be better than real estate, let's talk about it this way. Let's talk about the tax benefits of all of this. You know, you can do a 1031 exchange on a primary residence. Not on a primary residence. A 1031 is a tax exchange that goes on an investment. You can keep trading that investment in over and over and over and over again and not paying capital gains on the earned income of that investment at the time of the sale. Obviously, if it was a rental and you were earning income during the rental phase, you would have to pay taxes on that. And then also, that's for primary residences. When we're moving into those, you get $250,000 if you're a single person, or $500,000 if you are a couple, to invest in the next part of the property. That's not going to be counted towards you. So if you bought a house for $350,000 15, 20 years ago, and now it's worth $550,000, that $200,000 in equity that you would have gained is tax-free, right? As a primary residence. If that was an investment property, that $200,000 in equity could be rolled into a 1031 exchange and taxed over to the next property, and it becomes kind of like a flat line, like it's not even there anymore. And the third one that I like to talk about is for seniors, specifically here in California. If you are a senior and you already own a property, whatever property that you own at that time, let's say you're getting ready to sell it. Hannah and I have some clients up in Carlsbad who are considering this because their mother is in a retirement home right now, and they're considering selling, the single family that she used to occupy. And she can take that tax basis. She's owned the house in like the 1980s, which is about $3,000 to $5,000 a year, versus it being $20,000 to $30,000 a year, which is what it would be now. She can take that tax benefit, and when she sells the single family, purchase a condo, move into a retirement home. Some of the retirement homes out there actually do work with 1031 exchanges and these senior exchanges, because they are government provided benefits. You could use that money to move to another property. So there's a lot of different outcomes that could happen here. It's not an either or situation when you're looking at S&P 500 versus real estate. It really is about looking at them both like they are investment types of deals that you should be doing, and using the S&P for liquidity and the real estate for long term can actually leverage wealth building. I've done that myself with my 401k. A lot of you know that I used to work at a private aviation firm owned by Warren Buffett. I would hear a lot of people talk about things on the airplane, talk about the different financial instruments that are in the market and how they've used those instruments over the years. And one of my things that I did was I turned my 401k when I left that company and started my own real estate business into a solo 401k. And then I hired an attorney to write up my documents, and my company is the administrator of my private 401k. So there's so many different ways you can do this. And then what I was doing was I'd take some money out and I'd buy a property, I'd fix the property up, I'd live in it for a couple years, and then I would put it as a rental, and I would go out and do another one, and then I would do another one. And I did like 3 of those before I actually could afford to buy a single family home in San Diego. Not gonna lie, I had to buy 3 condos, 2 of them in places that I really didn't want to live, just to be able to kind of get into that single family home market as a single man, on one income. It kind of slows you down a little bit, but you have to be thinking about these things as an investor. You start where you are, and sometimes you can start where you are using government programs in housing. You can't do that in the S&P 500. So if you're looking for a brokerage where we could kind of guide you through this. We don't care how much money you have. If you've only got $3,000, let us come up with some plans for you. Send us a DM or hit us up with any questions that you might have about why Pam Bondi was throwing the S&P 500 in everybody's face while we're trying to talk about people molesting children. Because it's definitely a tactic for you not to pay attention to what's actually happening.